Welcome to this second podcast from PHTM, and today we're going to explore the future of technology that will help bring about the electric vehicle revolution. And joining us is Alastair Clarke from Evey Technology. Welcome, Alastair. Good to have you on our second series. So the first part really is just to explore a little bit about your company and the technology that is helping to make clean air zones possible in major cities like London. So I think for those that don't know you, if you could just give us a little bit of background about what your company does and really just explore Evey Technology as an organization.
Yes, thank you so much. So Evey Technology really was born out of a company called eConnect Cars. I set up eConnect Cars back in 2013. And we were the first all-electric taxi company in London. We started off with a fleet of Nissan Leafs, doing work for contracts around London. And during that time, we learned quite a lot about how you would use an electric fleet in a dynamic demand environment such as a taxi fleet. And from that, we started developing some technology alongside Innovate UK and the London Metropolitan University. And we spun out that technology into a new company called Evey Technology. And I'm now the CEO of Evey Technology. And that's what we really use as our springboard to help other fleets transition to electric mobility.
Let's talk about the clean air zones being set up. There's an increasing number out in major cities. How crucial will the purchase and usage of electric vehicles be for the actual enablement of clean air zones?
I think it is critical. I think the restrictions will probably get more and more restrictive in terms of what vehicles can be used, the cost of using various different types of vehicles in city centres. I don't think this problem's going away. We're starting at a point where there are certain standards that are being imposed by local governments and councils. But any toxics or any pollutants in the air is damaging to health. So whilst we might see certain limits today, that's still not good for us, and we'll probably see those going down and down and down. So it's not going to be, we'll hit Euro 6 and then we should all be happy and we'll go home and that's all be good, because actually that's still going to be threatening for life for those people who live in those cities and work in those cities.
So can you draw a comparison in terms of cost of ownership between an EV vehicle and the total cost of ownership, maintenance costs, versus a petrol diesel vehicle at the moment? Is there a winning argument, would you say, for going EV?
I certainly think so for certain people in certain cases. I think most commentators would say that the parity in terms of total cost of ownership between diesels and electric vehicles is maybe 1 or 2 years away still. However, if you're driving into clear air zones or in ultra low emission zones, then obviously you're going to have to incorporate the cost of those tariffs, if you like, into those total cost of ownership equations. And in those cases, then I think certainly electric vehicles are economic today. You've obviously got some a lot cheaper running costs, the maintenance costs are a lot cheaper, the fuel costs are a lot cheaper. So that if you're not having to spend money on those tariffs, then actually your total cost of ownership comes way down. And I think there is still some debate in the industry as to around how residual values are changing between diesels and electric cars. I think quite a few people who own diesel cars now are looking at their residual values and a bit concerned as to what those values will be in a year, 2 years' time. Whereas the electric vehicle market, although you're having new vehicles coming on, the existing vehicles are still holding their second-hand car value price quite well because they are in demand. There's not that many electric vehicles actually reaching these shores, and therefore those vehicles are in demand, and therefore the residual values are holding, and therefore the total cost of ownership is less.
Now, you've developed models that help people understand how to properly deploy their electric vehicle fleets. Out of those models, what kind of benefits are you seeing coming from owning electric vehicles if you're a private hire, a taxi fleet owner?
I think there's various models that really promote the use of electric vehicles. It's certainly in the question of tenders being pushed forward by corporate accounts. A lot of them now are asking for, what is your electric vehicle strategy? What's your proposals for using electric vehicles? You're seeing some quite strong corporate social responsibility messages coming through from large organisations. And if you're providing services to those organisations, then you're going to have to start answering their questions around what are you going to do with electric vehicles or electric mobility, or the alternative question is other sources of fuel like hydrogen fuel cells or whatever it might be, whatever zero emission strategy you might have, you still got to have one. So I think in order to be able to compete in that market, then you're going to have to start thinking about how you're switching across. And also, as I said, the total cost of ownership, the economics start working. And I think also a lot of drivers see the benefits of driving electric vehicles because there's such an easy way to drive. There's no gears, there's no even automatic clutching. It's very easy to do a long shift in an electric vehicle because they're not so tiring. It really is a point and drive. It's a very simple car to drive, very easy car to drive, and that appeals to a lot of drivers as well.
Well, those are the benefits, but what would you say are the pitfalls?
I think the obvious pitfalls are range and cost. So if you can get the cost equation right for your business, then that's obviously that box ticked. The range of the vehicles is going up constantly. When we started out with eConnect cars, we were using the 24 kilowatt Leafs, and they had a range of 60, 70 miles. So that was challenging. There's no doubt about it, and I've got scars to prove it. But now the vehicles out there now today have got 40 kilowatt batteries. They're doing 160 miles, 170 miles, and going up to say 220, 240 with the 63 kilowatts cars that are on the market today. That's a good, decent range. And I think if you understand where your vehicles go, what opportunities you have for charging during the shift and outside the shift of those vehicles, then I think there is a real application of electric vehicles today. You don't have to wait till tomorrow until that silver bullet of a 1,000-mile car or 500-mile car becomes available, because it's not relevant. You can use your current fleet of electric vehicles to do the job.
Okay. Would you say that investing in electric vehicles for a fleet is a bit of a gamble at the moment?
I think I would recommend to anyone taking small steps. I certainly wouldn't invest a large part of your fleet straight away into an electric vehicle option. I think it's identifying which vehicles in your fleet make absolute sense today, i.e. the ones that are maybe coming to the end of their useful life as a diesel and you're looking to replace it anyway, ones that are constantly in urban areas that have got low emission zones, or ones that perhaps do less mileage, and just have a look at how those cars are being used today. Is there opportunities for charging? What's the charging infrastructure that you have available? Can you use that charging infrastructure efficiently with the other optimization that you might bring to bear on the fleet? And it's worth bearing in mind. I think a lot of private hire operators or fleet operators sort of forget that they actually have a very strong negotiating position with the charging infrastructure network owners, because they're the ones that can provide the underlying utilization that's going to underwrite their investment in charging infrastructure. So if you find an area you're operating without infrastructure, then I think it's a very valid call to one of the many operators now or networks who offer rapid charging, and look to them to work with them to say, well, I need this infrastructure in these sorts of places to enable me to switch to electric, and that's going to underwrite their infrastructure investment. So I think now is the time. I think you're in a very strong position to start really owning the debate, owning the move, owning the challenge and the transition to electric vehicles, and putting in place some of those early steps and learning from those early steps in order to improve your strategy and better use the investment that you dedicate to the transition, so that you're best placed to benefit from all the positives that are going to be coming from using an electric vehicle fleet.
Now, talking to the licensed driver community, there's a bit of a worry about certain timescales, and they believe that the clean air zones and the CAS changes in some areas are coming in too soon and in order for them to be able to afford to change over to EVs or even find an EV vehicle in time. Could you comment on this sort of pressure that people are facing, and maybe how you can help?
I certainly have a lot of sympathy and empathy. I do think in certain circumstances, the sticks that are the ultra low emission zones and the CASs apparently are maybe being brought in too early compared to the carrots of the grants to switch to electric vehicles, etc. I mean, perhaps we could have longer on the grant side before we start switching over to the stick side of the equation, or the movement, if you like. But today is the day when we face these challenges and we have to do something about it. I don't think there's any real benefit in complaining or lobbying or just trying to hope that it goes away. I don't think it is going to go away, and therefore you're going to have to do something about it. So taking some investment into some technology, some investment into new cars to help you understand how you're going to be able to face up to these new challenges is the way I would advise. And there is technology out there that can help you. EV technology provides telematics data to enable you to track your vehicles and also to identify what status of charge is in that vehicle, and that can be integrated into your auto dispatch systems to enable you to continue to run your business as you always have done without the fear of your vehicles running out of charge in the middle of a job, which is what no one wants.
You mentioned the magic word grants. There seems to be a lot of variance around the country as to the potential grants that you can get to subsidise the purchase of EVs. How can taxi and private hire licence holders find out whether they qualify for any financial assistance in their area and whether they will actually receive these grants?
The best place to really challenge that or to identify where you sit is with the Office of Low Emission Vehicles. They are the government's arm for all grants being provided centrally for the switch to electric vehicles. They have a good website and some good information there that you can find out exactly what you're entitled to. I certainly think there are some very, very good grants out there to help you switch to electric vehicles. And they should be available to everybody in the country. I don't think there's too much in terms of specific regional grants, except in the case where they're installing ultra low emission zones, in which case there may be additional grants that your particular area may be able to obtain. But certainly the standard plug-in car grant, if you like, is still there and available for people who use private hire vehicles as well as individual owners of vehicles as well.
Now, it's one thing running electric vehicles in the cities. The infrastructure is starting to appear. So where you've got short journeys, you've got a predictable pattern. But in terms of battery usage, what about taxi and private hire drivers who are based out in rural areas, out in the sticks, and have to cover much more distance and unpredictable journeys?
Yeah, I think that's certainly going to be a challenge for certain operators, depending on the routes that they take and the distances they travel. The recent launch of the Hyundai Kona is a good example of a vehicle that's now got a 63 kilowatt battery, costs around £30,000 and can do 250, 260 miles. So if you're feeling that you need to do more than that, then perhaps now's not the time to be switching to an electric vehicle fleet. But you need to consider, I think, exactly what it is that you use those vehicles for. So if you're doing 250 miles plus, then it's probably because you're traveling from a rural area, maybe a long distance to an airport. And if you're driving to an airport, perhaps you can use a rapid charging opportunity at the airport whilst waiting for a return fare, or just you might have to delay your return until you've charged up on the way back. Perhaps try and coordinate that with the driver having a break, having a coffee and a bite to eat or whatever. These cars now with a rapid charger, a 63 kilowatt battery, you pretty much topped up within about 45, 50 minutes. So it's not hours and hours of waiting. These chargers now are putting more and more energy into the cars at quicker and quicker time, and therefore you can get on with your day with less disruption.
Now, obviously talking about range, it applies in particular to taxis who have to do specialist runs for things like airport journeys. Many are afraid that the charge will run out and their passengers will be stranded and miss the flights. So what happens in practical terms, and what are the ways of mitigating that kind of risk?
Well, this is a big challenge, and one of the ones that we found with eConnect cars. The range that you are provided on the dashboard is very variable depending on what you do with the car. So the range on the dashboard will maybe say you have a 60-mile range based on the fact that your battery is showing a 60% state of charge, and that will be based on the journeys you've just been doing, so the routes you've just been taking. If you've been working down A roads or in city centres, you'll have a longer range for that 60% than if you went on a motorway. So if your next job was a motorway job, then you wouldn't be able to do 60 miles. You may be only able to do 50 miles on that 60%. And therefore that change in the prediction around what range you can do is a constant feed into the range anxiety that drivers talk about. So what we develop is algorithms to say, well, let's have a look at your predicted journey. So where are you going? We know where you're going, and we know where you are today and now, and therefore we can identify which routes you're going to be taking and the speeds you're sort of going to be doing. We can look at the weather. We can look at what type of driver is driving that vehicle, their driver history, to work out what miles per kilowatt they generally do. And then we can create a much more accurate prediction as to what your battery percentage will be on your destination when you reach your destination. So if that is below your contingency, so it's below 10% or etc., you would look to send another car and not that particular vehicle. Or it should be able to tell you, yes, you'll be able to get to that destination with battery to spare, and maybe once you've dropped off your passenger, that would be the time to start looking for your next charge. But that's the sort of things that we can build into the booking dispatch system, so that actually the computer works all that for you, and the driver just gets sent a job that he knows he can do with utter confidence. And then the system will tell him afterwards, well, your next job is here, or actually your next job is a charging job, and here's your nearest charge point. Go and charge the car for half an hour, and then you're back on the road, and here's your next job after that. So I think all we need to do is we need to take the complexity out of electric vehicles for the operators and the users, for the drivers. I think there is a concern as to understanding all the ins and outs, and it's an electric vehicle and it's got low range, and where's the charging infrastructure. All that can be done by booking dispatch systems, by computers, and we can optimize constantly to ensure you're getting the most efficient use of the fleet that you've deployed.
Okay, so another mounting concern is about the electric charge point infrastructure. Essentially, that there are not enough charge points, especially rapid charge points, which are crucial for the taxi and private hire vehicles for a quick turnaround. How soon will there be an improvement in this situation, particularly for the benefit of independent drivers?
I think it's a very valid challenge, and certainly in the last few years there hasn't been enough infrastructure for fleets. Yes, there's some on the motorways for people driving longer distances. Motorway service stations, there'll be a couple of rapid chargers on there. That's fine. But if you've got a fleet operating in a city centre, that's no use to you. We need infrastructure where you're going to be dwelling, or where you're going to be resting, or where you're going to be waiting for your next particular journey. We when we were eConnect cars, we had a big contract, so we knew at certain points of the day our cars would sort of aggregate around that area waiting for the next job. And that's that point where I either identify what charging infrastructure is there already, or you go and talk to the network operator who's operating your area. Over the last 2 years, or less than that, over the last year, we've had some very big companies coming into the sector. So BP have spent a lot of money purchasing existing networks and rolling out extended networks. Shell have come in with the same plan. So now you're seeing some big companies with some deep pockets starting to roll out some infrastructure that is much broader and therefore much more available to different users, whether that be fleet users or individual drivers. So I think I would say that actually today is a day when pretty much the infrastructure is there or coming very soon, and it's just a question of looking at your particular area, where you operate, what infrastructure you're going to need, and having a think, well, what's there initially now, and who can go and talk to bring in some more infrastructure. Because as I said previously, you do have a strong negotiating position. These charge point network operators have got investment behind them they need to roll out, but they want to roll out at places where they know they're going to be used. And if you can tell them that at this particular site you're going to get good utilisation for my taxis, then they'll be more than happy to come out and put some infrastructure in there.
Okay, so what can private hire operators do to up their game in the future of Evey in this industry?
It comes down to the use of data. So you need to identify, who's driving your vehicles, what sort of economies are they making, very similar to you do in diesel and petrol cars. But then also you need to marry in with where the infrastructure is to enable charging, especially the rapid charging. What are your predictive algorithms in terms of your destinations, where you're going to be going? The next stage really on from there is to think about, if you have a depot and you bring your vehicles back to depot and you want to have some charging at your depot site, well, how much supply do you have? So you might look at 1 or 2 charge points, probably be enough supply capacity at your depot to support that. But as soon as you start putting in more charging infrastructure, suddenly you're constrained by the electricity supply, and therefore you want to try and avoid having to get a new connection in from the district network operator, a new connection to provide you with more supply. And actually, you can optimize your existing supply by combining data from the vehicle around what status of charge it's going to have when it arrives back at the depot. And what supply you have available from your existing utility. And this is all around what we call smart charging, and making sure that you charge at the right particular time to make sure you get the lowest tariffs, so you can benefit from low cost of electricity at the right times of the day, and also making sure that each car is charged up to its maximum or whatever it needs to be able to perform its duty for the next day. And that can be done through switching between different charge points as and when you need it. So that's more of a detailed infrastructure design, smart charging optimization type technique that we're seeing being deployed in large fleet depot areas, and can also be very applicable to the private hire sector as well, especially in areas where they have depots.
How far away are we from this industry being 100% electric hybrid?
Electric hybrid, I think, is coming very soon. Fully electric, I think, is a bit further away. I think there will still be some cases where you're going to have some unique cases of drivers needing to drive long distances, 500 miles or whatever, for a specific purpose. Another area I know which is hard to use electric vehicles for at the moment is in the wheelchair accessible vehicles, basically because there's just not enough of them around. They're quite expensive still, so for those sort of private ambulances or wheelchair accessible vehicles, that's a bit further away perhaps. But certainly today, I think in city centres, within the next few years, you're going to see a large majority of electric vehicles in the private hire fleets. You've only got to look at the strategies being followed by the likes of Uber and Addison Lee. What they're starting to do with their fleets. They're already trying various different operating models and use cases with electric vehicles, because they can see this coming and actually it being a competitive advantage for them in the future. So you've got to try and move with the times and see what you can do with your fleet, I think, to start on this journey. And even if it's just 1 or 2 cars to start with, start learning from it, put in the telematics in dongles to get the data out, start working out how you can incorporate that into your fleet booking dispatch systems, talk to your existing software providers, talk to Evey Technology about how we can help. There's lots of different ways you can start approaching this problem. I think the worst thing you can do is do nothing or try and avoid it, because I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's a lot more prevalent now than it was 5 years ago when I started eConnect cars.
Okay, Alastair, what can be learned from the past reaction of the industry to mobility on demand services?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because when I was launching eConnect cars and the likes of the mobility as a demand service were coming in with Uber, etc., there was an initial reaction by the industry to lobby hard against it, to try and find ways of bringing in legal contesting, just trying to sort of defend what they do with this new disruption. And within 2 or 3 years, I think it became apparent that consumers wanted this new way of working. They wanted this ability to use their phones to call vehicles on demand, this mobility on demand, and therefore the strength of that change was too strong, and the operators can no longer prevent it from happening. So the operators started investing in technology to meet this new requirement in different ways. That they still offer a different service to what Uber does. Don't get me wrong, but they're still using that whole smartphone technology through booking dispatch systems, through soft integrations, through working with aggregators to provide a very quick service for those seeking such a change in their previous relationship with their mobility provider. And I think we're seeing the same with electric vehicles. Initially, there's been a bit of a lobbying against, a defending what we currently do. It's not possible for us to do it. We have to delay it. There's all these reasons why it can't work for us. We can't use electric vehicles as taxis, etc., etc. Whereas I think some of the real first movers, if you like, are looking at ways to use technology to go overcome these challenges and get through these barriers and actually start looking for the positives. And I think that's where we are today. I think we're seeing some of these fleets starting to use the technology, like the telematics, like the advances in booking dispatch systems, looking at the different types of electric vehicles that they can use to try and work out, well, how can they make this work for them? What is it that's going to make them be able to differentiate themselves from the competition? Because it's quite difficult in this market. It's quite a saturated market to differentiate yourself from your competition. And certainly electric vehicles is one way. And being able to deploy electric vehicles in a way that's sustainable for your business is going to be key. And I think the sooner you start on that journey, the sooner you start on identifying what your strategy is going to be, the better.
Okay. Now, in terms of strategies then, finally, there's a lot of company merger activity going on. Is there an alternative in terms of something like a soft merger where people can share back office and all of the sort of infrastructure resources?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think that's a very valid strategy. We've certainly talked to a couple of companies about putting in a shared infrastructure system. So looking at their area of operations, whether that be on a city basis, maybe 4 or 5 large taxi companies in a city can say, right, well, we want to reserve this infrastructure. We want to be able to book this infrastructure for our vehicles. We will work alongside the network operators to say, right, these 10, 15, 20 rapid charges, whatever it might be, they're reserved for our use, and then we'll basically predict how often we're going to be using those charge points, and we'll put in a guaranteed number of transactions for you. That frees up the infrastructure for them. That gives security of supply as to when they can get those charge points. You can then use technology to book those charge points as and when the vehicles are needed, and that can all be predicted based on the telematics. So if we know where those vehicles are from those 5 fleets or whatever it might be, and what states of battery charge they're going to need, then we know that, okay, that vehicle A, when it drops off passenger B, will be near charge point C with 30% charge, and therefore we'll book that charge point for that car to arrive at that time, and therefore you can optimize and utilize that infrastructure in those vehicles in the best way. And I think those soft integrations across the city are going to be a way forward in certain circumstances. Again, it's through collaboration. It's going to need people to work together, but I think that is going to be the best way forward for a lot of the medium-sized companies, or even in large companies in sort of the medium-sized cities around the country. In London, you may still some more individual strategies with Uber and the likes of Addison Lee doing their own thing, but certainly other companies that sit below that tier could certainly work together and collaborate to provide a system that's going to work for them.
Fantastic. Really good overview, I think, for the private hire and taxi industry in terms of strategies and what's going on and how the future will evolve. So, Alastair, thank you so much for that insight. I'd just like to ask, what's the best way for people to learn more about your company? Where do they go? How do you normally help people get on board in terms of EV technology?
Sure, there's two ways really. We have an email address, which is info@ev-tech.uk, or you can go to our website, which is www.ev-tech.uk, and we'll be happy to help wherever we can.
Fantastic. That's great. Okay, so that's the end of our podcast with Evey Technology, and we would like you to stay subscribed. The best way is to go to PHTM, the nation's favorite read website, and you'll have the links there for either the YouTube version or the SoundCloud version, and grow with our audience the new way to get your news and information alongside the very best print media newspaper for the taxi and private hire industry. That's all from myself, John Allard, on PHTM, and look forward to giving you our next podcast soon. Bye for now.